to more people. Thank you.
Thank you for that reminder. Thank you. So I start the recording. I hope it works. Yes, I think it works now. So I just want to begin with the concept of the heart of this conversation today, and I would like to invite you both to help us with this concept. So when we are actually saying like we are using gender lens in our research, policy, or practice, what exactly gender lens, and how would you describe that? What we should pay attention when we are saying like, oh yeah, we are using gender lens in our work. Perhaps Wendy, I could begin with you, and then Marisa, I would love to hear your perspective as well. The floor is
Okay, well,
yours.
thanks, Irma, and hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm very pleased to have been invited. And yeah, these are key questions, of course. But for me, I think if we're talking basic things, we have to understand gender is not about any natural differences between men and women or genders. It's not about a particular genitalia. It's very much about a social and performative category. And it's also a socially constructed category of difference, power and qualities, which are embedded in historical, economic, political, and cultural structures. So it's a complex thing. And gender power inequalities are something that don't function the same way in every context. That's me with my gender and development hat on. You have to be very aware of the different questions about power, social values, distribution, and justice within the context in which you're speaking. Um, so, I mean, all of us today have a very different notion of what is gender according to our education, where we came from, what we're perceiving. So it makes it a difficult thing to say, put on a gender lens. But if we want to try to think that through in terms of climate, I think we're doing that in relation to challenging or at least understanding that there's a very gendered scientific gaze, a very particular epistemology, and a notion of objectivity and rationality, which is informing how we understand climate. So, using a gender lens, we can really unpack how that knowledge has been produced, the kind of subjectivities it's produced, and the kind of politics it's also enabling or not enabling. And I would add here for me that we also have to recognize that knowledge is not only coming from the scientific establishment, but it's also coming from indigenous knowledges. It's coming from feminist practical awarenesses of what's going on. And I hope we'll get into what that means later on. And maybe if I could just add a few more things that I would like us to think about as we're talking together. One is that we all have a sense of what are gender norms, right? It's complex, but we know how to behave as a gender, what we're expected to do, how people perceive us. And in that sense, it's very hegemonic, very deeply so. So it's very difficult to undo that kind of understanding of gender that we feel is innate to us. So it becomes normalized. So that's one reason why it's a very difficult concept to really unpack and then use as we would like to in terms of policy. And as I said, it's very contextual and it also changes over time. So in that sense, we have to see gender as very embedded in both legal, economic, social, and political constructions. And it also is intersected, and we'll be talking about this in relation to race, class. Um, and I think for me, that is again makes it a very important concept, but also one that's very hard to then work with if we're really trying to do it properly, as Irma said, to go more deeply into it, not just add in gender into a kind of climate discussion. Um, and as I also said, it's really permeating our everyday lives. So it's also important that we recognize that there's a lot of emotions. Irma warned us. These are difficult topics, troubling topics, and there's a lot of backlash we're dealing with when we're talking about gender. So there's a tendency for people to sort of keep it quiet because it's too difficult to bring it up, particularly when we're talking about environmental resources and issues around violence, and also when we're talking about economics. So I think these are complicated things and which we have to take into account when we think about a gender lens. But maybe just to end, what's important is that we can make and remake gender. It's possible to do that. So this is why these kinds of discussions are very important, to hear from all our different contexts, our different disciplines, our different practical experiences and our different sense of self, what we mean by talking about a gender lens.
Thank
Well,
you.
that's me. Did I dive too much into the deep end? I see.
No, I think that's perfect. Thank you, Marisa.
Okay, so I think that Wendy gave just a very, very complete answer to, or at least a very good start and stimulus to what we can discuss about what it is when we talk about gender and what's this of having a gender lens. So perhaps, and I fully agree with most of the or all remarks that Wendy just put on. But perhaps I will try just to give two ideas here to complement and maybe give some also more operational examples on how we can have a gender lens. And first, I think it's already clear that it's when we talk about applying a gender lens or having a gender perspective, we need to move beyond just simply counting women and men. I think this was clear from what Wendy was just saying, and we need to understand these gender structures, the power issues, and the social realities of the people we are talking about. And that's what makes the issue complex, because when we dive into this social arena, then there's a lot of layers and backgrounds and experience that make it complex. But if we want to think about what is that about having a gender lens in doing research and trying to make it more accessible for researchers to start thinking about it, I would start by asking ourselves a couple of questions when we are planning our research or even our interventions. So is this issue that I'm focused on affecting people in different manners? So who is going to be affected by these particular issues? And is it going to be affecting these people in different ways? So when we start talking about this, it may not just be gender, it may be other categories, but in the end, we can see how they all interrelate. So who has access to these resources? Who has access to this decision making about the resources or about the issues that we want to reflect in our research? Who are we including in our research? Whose perspectives are we collecting data on or from? How we are interpreting, based on what, and who is the research team? Are we having diverse research teams regarding gender, but also, again, other issues that allow us to tackle the phenomena that we are interested in, using different viewpoints, different backgrounds, different experiences? So, and some of the work that we've done when we try to implement this gender equality plan at the University of Porto also try to address this by developing some tools for researchers and for academics to start embracing this gender perspective in their daily life, in the means of their daily professional life as well, because it's always difficult to grasp this fully. But if we try to make it more manageable by, for instance, operationalizing it into questions that we can ask ourselves, maybe having this gender lens can become more attainable for all of us. So I hope I just pinpointed here some more practical issues on how we can translate this gender lens for research.
Thank you, Wendy and Marisa. And I agree that gender lens is not just at women and steer approach, but also a way of interrogating structure that produce inequality in the first place. So my next question would be, Wendy, your work in feminist political ecology has been so important in showing that, as you say, it's very complex issue, and that environmental issue is always entangled with questions of power, care, labor, embodiment, and knowledge. So I would like to ask, like, how can feminist political ecology help us to understand climate vulnerability and resilience in a more deeper way? And in particular, how does it help us to see the role of power, care, labor, and situated knowledge in a way that is that can help climate framework?
Oh, thank you, Irma. Huge, huge question, of course, that I think I've spent most of my life trying to figure out. Um, but just to say for people, I don't know the audience, so feminist political ecology is something that has really come out of both academic thinking around ecologies, but also around feminist thinking around environmental justice. And in many ways, it's reflecting not just if you like, the sort of policy research framing, but it's also looking at how communities are responding to climate change or climate crisis or devastation of the planet, however one wants to put it. And in that sense, it's important that it works across scales. So it's not only looking at these big global frameworks, it's working with communities and then seeing across scales how these link and shape and form the global framing of the issue of climate. So in that sense, it's really I think bringing insights from feminist understanding of the importance of care and the importance of social reproduction, but also environmentalists understanding of the importance of not only thinking about humans here, but also about uh, the earth others or plants, trees, the planet, and how one can do that within a justice framework. Now, I we I think it's great that we're kind of, I think, on the same page with gender, but I think also environmentalism and how one thinks about climate, there are a lot of contradictions in a very technological way of looking at it, and then a more political, down to earth. How can we work with the emotional and the types of violences it's producing in people's everyday lives? So the troubles. I think feminist political ecology tries to not hide those and say that actually there are some very troubling politics in the whole climate debate. And that we need to take time to be seeing those troubles. And if you like, a feminist political ecologist is trying to bridge the kind of big issues, macro issues, with these micro issues, but also recognizing there are very different kinds of knowledges and life worlds that you are then trying to bridge as you do that. So for me, feminist political ecology is not afraid to really recognize that there's a lot of harm that we're doing in terms of the extractivism, both capitalist and also colonial economies, and that the sort of harm it's inflicting on different bodies, on different ecologies, and different living worlds. And in that sense, it's also recognizing by asking these questions, these are very political questions. It's not just a matter of managing them or doing a better framework or producing a better policy or doing a different project. You're talking about people's lives which are right now being harmed. So this means working with people, also politically being involved, linking yourself with the community. This means being what I think feminists would recognize as a strong objectivity. You can't pretend that there's some objective knowledge you're looking at here. You're actually looking at real issues around plantation agriculture, about oil drilling, about mining, the type of barrenness that all of this is leaving behind. This devastates people's cultures and societies and ecologies. So in that way, I think feminist ecology is also looking at the alternative stories beyond the sort of framing of the SDGs or a sort of capitalist story of, oh, we just need to drill, baby drill, but actually trying to see how communities are surviving and living and working through this kind of extractivism that climate is a product of, climate change is a product of. And in particular, interested in how women specifically have had to really struggle putting their lives on the line in relation to defending their territories and their communities. Um, so in that sense, I think feminist ecology is trying to really bring the politics into the conversations around climate from the margins, from a certain point of view, from a policy point of view, um, but really at the heart of things from people's ordinary lives point of view. So in that sense, I think it's also recognizing that we are having to deal with the trouble that we have. And by doing that, we're bringing new forms of ecologies, new forms of living with the environment. And I think that that's, for me, what's so beautiful about feminist ecology is it's dealing with the very violent, extractive, capitalist world that is really destroying the planet, but it's also in doing so, in staying and listening to communities, seeing what is emerging, and not just staying with the big troubled picture, but actually seeing, well, in different at different scales, at different levels, a lot is going on, and having hope in that. So I think that to me is what I think feminist ecology can bring to this conversation. Obviously, where gender is very crucially involved there, but it's linked to many other things, which I know we'll go on to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, for your advice about seeing the trouble, staying with the trouble, and also trying to recognize the trouble. As a feminist economist, one of the trouble that we are trying to recognize is the case of unpaid care work that is not conceptually included in traditional national accounts such as GDP measure, and it's also not contributing to economic growth according to traditional economic measure, even though if when we actually calculate this unpaid care work, it is very substantial. It can range from 20% to around 40% of GDP based on the valuation of unpaid work at replacement cost. So thank you again for that. Marisa, let me bring you in here. My question is, you mentioned about gender equality plan in your institution. Now we have more research, more policy language around equality, but inequality still persists. So what is it so difficult to actually turn knowledge into societal change, and what is needed to connect theory and practice?
Yeah, I think that's the what at some point the $1 million questions. How we know that change needs to be done. We even get people to acknowledge that the structures need to change. So why does does the change doesn't occur so quickly and doesn't turn so quickly? So I think that I would just stress this. I think it's more or less clear that despite sometimes we having data showing how gender inequalities are persistent, this doesn't drive automatically to institutions to change, because to transform an institution, it requires knowledge, of course. I guess it's always the first point, but it requires a couple of other things: accountability, commitment, and sometimes that's where some of these issues are lacking. And even if when we are working with one institution, and giving again the example of our work in our university, but I guess this happens in a lot of other universities and a lot of other institutions as well, we don't exist in a vacuum. So the institutions are also very much linked to the social structures and the social climate. And we felt that. And just to give a very quick example, when we were starting to address these gender equality plans at our university within the consortium, we had partners from other universities struggling a lot with the concept of gender, with the concept of gender equality, and a lot of social movements, the gender backlash movements in those countries. So making it much more difficult to drive this change. But during our project, some of these institutions changed their leadership. The social climate started to change a bit, and they were able to implement a lot more actions than they were starting at the beginning, and to opposition, for instance, to other institutions that are at first more open, but then other resistance came. So I just want to pinpoint with this is that institutions and universities, they are embedded in a social context, and of course the social narratives will influence them. But besides that, we know that universities in particular, but other institutions again, they are not neutral, and they are also structured by power relations. I would even dare to say that universities are one of the most hierarchical institutions that exist. And there are a lot of barriers for institutions. So there's inertia. I think this is common overall. So organizations tend to reproduce their existing practices. So it's always hard to implement any kind of change. And resistance to gender equality is, as many of us that work on this field perceive, is subtle most of the times. And nowadays, and even talking about our context, is becoming more openly said. Some comments and some narratives against gender equality are becoming more open, but most of the resistance is still very subtle. So with what this means is that everything that implies a very structural change, a systematic change, will be much harder to accomplish. And when I said it at the beginning about accountability, change only exists when the top leaderships or the governance also embrace these kind of issues. It can come bottom up, of course, the change, and a lot of times, but to change the institution as a whole, it's also very important to have committed leaderships, committed governance to this change. And this is not something that it's constant across time. So it makes the change a lot of very dynamic, we could put it like that. So, but so if I try to summarize my ideas here, I would say that still we need to have data systems ready, monitoring systems, so that we know how our institutions are in these issues. We need to have these dedicated resources so that change can be and can become more relevant. Keeping up to date information on the institution is a way of trying to drive a little bit further this change. But equality doesn't derive directly from knowledge or from awareness. Because if that was the case, we could have been changing 50 years ago, and we are still struggling because the context is again complex and complicated. Yeah.
Thank you, Marisa. No, completely agree with the needs of having accessibility of data and also synergy. And when I go to my conversations with different climate actors in governance or NGOs, the main issue, one of them is sometimes that institutions often still reward disciplinary silos, either that's through data sharing or resources, financial resources, or time, or human resources. So that connects to my questions because this topic is so complex and complicated, and of course we cannot just tackle it from one department. It requires interdisciplinary collaboration. So what do you think the practical strategies that you have found useful in your work for building meaningful collaboration across disciplines and also across the world of research, policy, activism? Maybe we can start with Wendy first and then Marisa.
Oh, thank you. This is very interesting. Yeah, I've been involved in it both in terms of the NGO world and the UN world, trying to work to change, gender inequalities within institutions, and also, of course, in the university setting as well. And I would tend to agree with Marisa that the university setting, in a funny way, is even harder because that there's almost a lack of awareness of the politics of how structures work, in the sense that people who have power consider it their right to have power in a way that, at least in NGOs, there's at least a sort of negotiation around power in a different way. There are not the same rules and regulations. But having said that, if I could use the fact that I've been yeah, probably I'm older than most of us here in this I don't know what we're in, this cyberspace that we've created. Yeah, I've seen quite a lot of changes actually. A lot more awareness of hierarchies and shifts, and a lot more tools, if you like, to do it in different ways, and a lot more awareness. So I think there is something going on that's right. The fact that we can have these conversations and they're considered part and parcel of our research agendas or our political agendas, I think that there is something important to hold on to and to work to, and not forget that there's been decades of stuff that is there. But I agree with Marisa a lot. It's difficult to to take away the power of people who hold the power, and it's not only just giving it to women, it's also the types of women that are going to take up power. But I've been in rooms where you see it's happened and it makes a difference. But if I could just add another point to that, I totally agree with you, Marisa, but I'm just saying I don't think it's all bad, right? I think where I see new things happening, which I find difficult to know how to deal with. I mean, in a sense, the institutions, the bureaucracies, the tools. I mean, kind of we're there. We have to keep pushing, etc. But what I find difficult is that there's this really networked misogyny that is going on now, which I haven't seen so openly expressed in the last few years, which is really endorsing his hostility towards women. Of course, it's always been there, but it's online, and it's much more difficult to kind of get hold of where it comes from. And it's very much oppressing women. It's also oppressing LGBTQI people. But I think it's also something that shows a very different approach to how gender is understood, and this negativity towards non-binary people, towards trans people, and this split for the younger generation, Generation Z or Z or whatever, that there's a big split there, which I haven't seen before, or at least I haven't noted before. And I think that people are losing sight of what is diversity, what is gender equality in that sense, right? Because of this online environment, which is much harder to pin down and understand what to do with, I think. And it's overtones with racism and religious repression, etc. It makes it even more difficult. So I mean, we could point to examples, I'm sure, but I just wanted to mention that I think those divides are for me more difficult. This what I call network misogyny that's very much online. So I would be interested to know how Marisa deals with that, because I think that is important because and I'll stop now, but I mean, when we talk about climate crisis and climate change, it's got very material impacts, but it also has impacts on terms of how we're going to be able to communicate in the future, how we're going to be able to work with people, because it's going to impact our energy resources. It's going to cut people out of being able to know what's going on. So if we instead have we saw that in COVID, these bubbles of very negative, conspiracy theories, etc. I think this is a very difficult world for me to understand how you navigate it. And it's not divorced from climate. It's very much part of how we understand it. And in fact, yeah, the the type of energy that's used that is leading to climate crisis is also part and parcel of this online environment. I probably haven't explained it very well because I actually find it very difficult to know how to think it through with this gender lens that we have. But I would like to ask about, maybe Marisa has some thoughts on that.
Okay, I have thoughts, yes. Not necessarily, I guess, a very developed idea on how to tackle it or how to deal with it, but at least some thoughts. When you were talking, Wendy, I was thinking that many of these issues that we now discuss, or we are today discussing about gender lens and gender perspectives, they are, of course, being influenced by the by the timing we are in, and it's the online issues. It's the fact that people online have a very different experiences than before. But there's also these huge conversations about artificial intelligence and how it's shaping the world, and it's shaping relations, and it's shaping work itself. And so again, it will also shape our institutions and organizations function. And it also just giving another layer, I think it has to do a lot with this acceleration of changes. And indeed, the last couple of years, I would say, the acceleration in the digital environment, the use of the digital tools in the digital environment, in the in the AI, and all that, they leave very few room for us to reflect, think, and even try to position ourselves to the future, because we are just trying to understand what is going on right now. And what I mean by this is that with everything that is going on, it's sometimes very complicated to even know what's the direction to take next. So what's going to happen in the next 5 years and 10 years? And I'm not an expert for in terms of climate change and all that, but even considering this kind of topic, I believe that all this acceleration is posing a very different level of concerns for most of us. And besides these more negative perspectives that we could say about gender backlash, etc., it's also true that all these environments and digital use has also brought some positive silos, I would say, so that you have groups and you have people that are more able now to defend themselves and to have voice and to disseminate their ideas, and also to embrace and to bring other people for their own causes. So I guess there's always these kind of movements co-occurring, and it may depend a little bit, and it may take a while so that things stabilize a little bit more. But also going back to the Irma question about the interdisciplinary issues, and I think that's precisely the point, because some of us come from the social sciences, others from the natural sciences, and so we have different focus for these different phenomena. And I guess it's precisely because we kind of try to share and have these synergies and this collaboration across these different disciplines, that we could tackle such an issue as climate change, which is a very complex social but also environmental problem. So I guess this is a way of getting there. And in this webinar that you are organizing, you are trying precisely to bring different disciplines to talk a little bit more on how to find these solutions, and trying to give the point also to those solutions. I think that coming from different disciplines, we might find different strategies. But today you were also, I guess, when you were also discussing about how to work with people that are in the different areas. So indigenous people working in rural areas, in urban areas, and so working in co-designing the strategies for change with them is, of course, one very important tool. So not just the academics and the researchers and the scientific community, but also to give meaning to what we think, reflect, discuss, test. Sometimes in our labs, we need to go to the people and also have their views on even what are the major problems that we need to address. So co-designing research and co-designing the solutions is a very important aspect. So I tried to answer a little bit of both of your questions. I hope it was clear.
Yes, it was clear. Thank you, Marisa. Thank you, Wendy. And I definitely agree with co-designing research or strategy or solution that we are trying to do with our work. And I believe the audience is here not only just researcher, but also practitioners. And I think going towards the end of the closing of the webinar, I also want to ask, because we are so diverse and the issue is so complex, and it requires in-depth strategy that combines different perspective, different skills, expertise, and also to work with the community, not just to work about them, but to create solutions with them. What do you think practical entry points that you can suggest for integrating gender perspective from the very beginning of a project or research, rather than just treating it as an afterthought? And also, if you can name one concrete shift that researchers or institution or practitioner should make in order to make climate action more gender sensitive and justice oriented, what would that be? Perhaps Marisa can go first and then Wendy.
Okay, so one concrete shift that could make the research more gender inclusive in a way. I will go back maybe to one of the points that I started my intervention with. So when we are thinking even a research project or an intervention project, when we are planning for this issue, we can have a gender approach already when we start framing the question. So what is our research question, or what is the issue that we are trying to understand? Of course, we can find this research question with the people as we using the co-design methods that we were talking before, but also when we frame the questions, we can ask ourselves, what are the implications of this issue for different people, not just for men and for women, but for diverse people? Why or how is this phenomena impacting different characteristics, different people with different characteristics? Is the issue the same for everybody? How can I be sure that even when I do my readings, doing my PhD, and I try to frame my research question, do my readings reflect diversity, or are they all oriented from I would say in my area, most of the readings that we do are from either Europe or North America. So am I having a diverse literature review when I start framing my questions and my research questions? So it can even start from this. It can go further when I collect the data, when I think about the instruments that I will use, but already when I'm framing even my phenomena, I think this is a question that I could pose myself.
Thank you, Marisa. So a diverse knowledge and representation of different expertise. Wendy?
Yeah, well, I would agree with Marissa, but I think learning from feminist political ecology is also listening to the contradictions and where things are not obvious. That's to me the most important thing. So you're not looking for what you expect. You have to be really listening and see where there are problems and then go in, right? So for me, that's where you're asking the questions I think Marissa was mentioning. Um, by listening to the community, you're thinking about who's got the power to make decisions, who's controlling resources, whose knowledge counts, who's being heard, who has legal rights, who's visible, who's invisible. But you listen for where some emotions happen, where something contradictory happens, and that's probably where you should be going. So the unexpected, because the point about a gender lens is you're working with something that is going to tell you where there are inequalities, where there are difficulties, where something is not working out. So for me, that is also partly you might not know. You might be having to listen and learn from the communities you're with and be surprised. And to me, that's the essence of good research and good policy making, is not knowing, not going in knowing, but going in open to listen and to learn. And I think that is very much, I'm talking all the time about being a feminist. I think that's maybe my generation, but for me, that's what feminism is about, is listening to the other, listening and learning from the other. And that means, of course, Marissa's correct. You should be able to look across at all sorts of knowledges in different languages, in different contexts. I think I started off by saying that. But of course, we're all working on one particular issue and one particular thing. But to hear where the contradictions are in that particular issue is very important. Um, and I must say, it's not only gender, it's also listening to race, it's listening to disabilities, it's listening to a lot of those inequalities that gender is intersected with, which I think we didn't get to, but I think that that's also very important to point out.
Thank you, Wendy. Yes, that is true that Of course, this issue is very intersection, and it's also not a standalone topic, and we can go for another hour about that, but we don't have time. So thank you for your advice about listening with care and trying to be comfortable with not knowing and be open-minded. Now I think we can move to the audience. If they have any questions they would like to share, you can either type in the chat box or raise your hands, and then the floor is yours. Is there any question? Perhaps while we are waiting for the people to type in their questions or raise their hands, I would love to ask Marisa and Wendy if we want to follow your work, if there is a recent project or publication or initiative that you especially would like people to know about, please can you share a little bit with us?
You go ahead, Marissa. I mean, I should say I'm about to retire, so I'll be happily not having to worry too much every day about this. Of course, as a citizen of the world, yes, but I'll continue to, as you mentioned, this long list of publications, I'll be continuing to write, and particularly working with the Community Economies Research Network. And I'm not a political economist, but linking feminist political ecology to political economics is important, and working at the community level. And you were very kind to mention my book, Conundrums of Care, the recent one. So that's something I'll be also thinking through care as if you like, a politics of care in at the community level. Yeah, thank you for asking that, Irma. I hope that's clear. I'm happy to. I don't know how much people want to follow things up, but I'd be happy to send someone a copy of the book, or my I'll put my new email in the chat because I'll no longer be using my institutional one.
Thank you, Wendy. And if that's useful for other participants, we would also send both of your LinkedIn's and also the links to, as you said, Wendy, your book to the audience who registered, if that's okay. What about Marisa? Do you want to share something?
Yeah, I can share. I'm in terms of would say kind of a summary of the work we've done with gender equality issues at the university. Within this project, we also had a book that came out in late 2025. It is online and it's open access, which is precisely about the issues of scientific excellence. And here we talk about the knowledge production, precisely how knowledge production is also biased in many instances in our university. So this book is about scientific excellence and the development of equality, gender equality plans at the university. But in terms of projects, so I kind of divide my interests in this issue in, would say, two fields. So we have a couple of projects more linked to keep working with the university in terms of implementing some of the measures about in the gender equality plan. And we have two projects, one more devoted to training that we are still, of course, providing for staff, etc., regarding these issues. And another one, again, also linked more to the governance and to the change in the institution. And then the other strand of my work, that's where I came from my PhD, which was always about work-life balance topics. And so I keep on having some projects on parenting and how this, and you were discussing, Irma, about the economics of care. And so this links a little bit to some of this work on how families balance all this in the context where we know that gender norms are again very much strict and prescriptive to how families work. So these are some of the projects, but I guess that if you follow the pages, you'll get the news as they come, because everything goes online nowadays. Thank you. But thank you very much for asking. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I think as we come to a close, just briefly reflect on few key insights from today's discussion. Some of them are the persistence of gender equality. Inequality highlights a significant gap between availability of research and policy discourse, and how the implementation of effectivity of institutional change, and also these change require accountability and sustained institutional commitment. The institutions operate within broader social and political contexts, and shift in social narratives either facilitate or hinder gender equality initiative. Meaningful change require bottom-up engagement and strong commitment from leadership, supported by monitoring and accountability mechanism, and also trying to listen with care, and interdisciplinary collaborations is very essential to address complex challenges, which of course intertwine with social, political, and environmental dimensions. And on that note, I would also like to thank our speakers, Wendy Harcourt and also Marisa Matias, for their generosity, insight, and intellectual leadership today. Thank you also to everyone who joined us. Special thanks to my shift colleagues, Maria, Katarina, and Joanna, for helping out with the webinar planning and management. Additionally, as we are going to celebrate International Women's Day on 8th of March, while we are in this current time in polycrisis, when climate change, conflict, inequality, democratic backsliding are converging in ways that very disproportionately affect women and marginalized communities. So I hope today's conversation does not end here. I hope today's conversation energizes us even more. I hope it travels with you to your classroom, to your workspace, to your research, your communities, to the streets that we are going to march. So may we leave this space not just feeling informed, but also more passionate, to question more, to care more, to act more, and to stand with those whose voices are too often pushed aside. So thank you very much, everyone. Happy International Women's Day, and I wish you all wonderful rest of the day and happy weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.